In Invincible, Thetus is positioned as a radical visionary, a Viltrumite who saw through the brutality of his people's ideology and chose to oppose it at enormous personal cost. On the surface, his actions seem bold, even heroic. He assassinates Emperor Argal, defects from the Empire, and ultimately engineers the scourge virus, a biological weapon that devastates the Viltrumite population. But when you take a closer look, the legacy of Thaedus is not one of strategic brilliance. It is one of profound miscalculation. His plan didn't just fail to solve the problem, it arguably made it worse. At the heart of Thetus's motivations is his rejection of Viltrumite philosophy. Their society is built on a ruthless interpretation of strength. The weak are culled, the strong rise, and the survivors impose their will on the rest of the galaxy. Thetus clearly recognized the moral bankruptcy of this system.
And who is this?
Emperor Argal! He was killed.
By who?
The betrayer!
Emperor Argal was assassinated by the betrayer.
But our people call me by a different name. The Betrayer.
His assassination of Argal was intended to strike at the core of Viltrumite power, disrupting the leadership that upheld this ideology. But this act reveals the first major flaw in his thinking. He treated the problem as if it were centralized in a single ruler, rather than embedded in the culture itself. Killing Argal did nothing to dismantle the belief system that defined Viltrumite society. The empire didn't collapse into self-reflection. It continued functioning under new leadership, eventually consolidating power under a figure like Grand Regent Thrag. Thetus removed a figurehead but left the machinery of oppression intact. Worse, he didn't stay to influence or reform the system he sought to change. Instead, he fled, abandoning any chance to reshape Viltrumite society from within, or even guide it from without. This pattern of incomplete action becomes even more glaring with the creation of the scourge virus. As a weapon, it was devastatingly effective.
The Scourge virus.
How do you have this?
Because I was the one who created it.
You brought us to the edge of extinction! You killed billions!
How many are dead?
Billions upon billions.
The virus wiped out billions of Viltrumites, including many of the strongest and most influential members of their race. Entire bloodlines were erased, and the empire was pushed to the brink of extinction. In sheer scale, it was one of the most consequential acts in the history of this universe. And yet, despite its destructive power, the scourge virus represents the greatest failure of Thetus. Not because it didn't work, but because he didn't finish the job or even make sure that the virus wiped them all out. For a species as powerful as the Viltrumites, partial annihilation is not enough. Their biology, resilience, and ideology all favor survival and recovery. Leaving even a small number alive ensured that the empire, or at least its core values, would persist. Thetus, who clearly understood how dangerous Viltrumites were, somehow failed to account for this. There was no follow-up plan to track down and eliminate survivors, no containment strategy, no long-term enforcement mechanism.
It has finally slowed, but only because all remaining Viltrumites have been infected. A remaining population are the few who have recovered.
50. That cannot be true.
It's true. That is how many Viltrumites remain.
We will honor our fallen, rebuild ourselves at any cost. We are Viltrumites. We are without end.
He unleashed a galaxy-altering weapon and then simply stopped. This lack of follow-through is not just a tactical oversight. It reveals a deeper misunderstanding of the very people he was trying to stop. Thetus appears to have believed that the near extinction of the Viltrumites would force them to change, that suffering would lead to introspection, that loss would produce empathy, that a reduced population might abandon conquest in favor of coexistence. But this assumption is fundamentally at odds with everything we know about Viltrumite culture. Viltrumites don't interpret survival as a reason to change. They interpret it as validation. If anything, the scourge virus would reinforce their ideology. In their worldview, the weak died and the strong lived. That's not a tragedy. It's proof that their system works. The survivors, having endured a catastrophe that wiped out billions, would see themselves not as victims, but as the ultimate expression of Viltrumite superiority.
Quarantine the sick. Then blockade the planet and exterminate all non-Viltrumites with knowledge of the virus.
This is where the mindset of Thetus becomes almost contradictory. He opposed the Viltrumite emphasis on nature, the idea that strength and worth are inherent and immutable. Yet his actions ultimately reinforced that very belief. By failing to engage in any form of nurture, any effort to guide, educate, or rehabilitate the survivors, he left them with nothing but their original ideology. There was no intervention to reshape their values, no attempt to introduce alternative perspectives, no effort to build a new society from the ashes of the old one. In other words, Thetus expected change without creating the conditions for it. This is perhaps the most hurtful aspect of his plan. If he truly believed that Viltrumites could be better, that they were not irredeemably bound to their violent nature, then he had a responsibility to help them become better. But he didn't. He removed their leadership, devastated their population, and then stepped away as if the rest would take care of itself.
I was the first to turn my back on our people's cruelty.
You survived.
I didn't forget, Mother.
The first to reject Argal and his rule of strength.
He made us one. He showed us our power. He gave us the stars.
I killed Emperor Argal because I thought without his cruel leadership, our people would change.
Why was the Purge a blessing?
Because the Purge made us stronger.
When it only made our hate stronger.
Hoping that the virus would wipe out all Viltrumites, or that they would change, is not strategy. That's wishful thinking, and the consequences of that failure are severe. The surviving Viltrumites are not weaker in any meaningful sense. They are more concentrated, more hardened, and arguably more dangerous. With their numbers reduced, each individual becomes more valuable, more essential to the continuation of their species. This doesn't lead to humility, it leads to urgency. Their mission to expand, reproduce, and dominate becomes even more critical. Figures like Thrag embody this intensified ideology. They are not reformers. They are purists, committed to preserving and spreading Viltrumite dominance at all costs. The scourge virus didn't break their will. It refined it. It eliminated internal competition and left behind a core of the most powerful and ideologically committed individuals. Thetus may have inadvertently strengthened the very system he sought to destroy.
Did your parents hit you too hard?
No, General.
Someone dares to strike at us with a coward's weapon. Good. You will only make us stronger.
I have failed you. Make my death painful so others may learn and grow stronger from it.
There's also a moral dimension to consider. The scourge virus wasn't just a weapon against an empire. It was an act of near genocide. Billions of lives were erased in an attempt to prevent further suffering across the galaxy. That's an extreme measure, one that might only be justified if it definitively ended the threat. But it didn't. The Viltrumites survived, their ideology intact, their power diminished, but far from gone. So what was the result? Massive loss of life, with no lasting solution. That's what makes the scourge virus feel so profoundly wasted. It wasn't just that it failed, it's that it cost so much and achieved so little in the long term. Thetus paid the highest possible price in terms of destruction, but he didn't secure the outcome that might justify it. The Viltrumites are still a threat, still expansionist, still driven by the same brutal principles.
I wasn't sent to Earth just to conquer it. And yes, I succeeded. The fact that Mark is almost as strong as me proves the human race is suitable for Viltrumite interbreeding.
Thetus is not a master strategist or a misunderstood hero. He's a cautionary example. He identified a real problem, took bold action against it, and then failed to follow through in the ways that actually matter. He underestimated the resilience of Viltrumite ideology, overestimated the transformative power of suffering, and neglected the importance of guidance and reconstruction. His failure is that he had the opportunity to truly change the course of history. With his knowledge, his conviction, and his willingness to act, He could have done more than just destroy. He could have rebuilt. But he didn't. And because of that, the Viltrumites remain what they've always been. Not because they couldn't change, but because no one, including Thetus, ever truly made them better.
Even as diminished as they are, our people are strong, and many of their conquered planets will continue fighting for them out of fear.